Waitress circled words on the Mafia Boss's bill. It read, "Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now. Keep the change, sweetheart. Consider it hazard pay for the terrible coffee. You might want to keep the receipt this time, sir. I've added a personal recommendation. The air in the diner wasn't just hot. It was pressurized, waiting for a spark." When Callum Waverley looked down at the crumpled slip of paper, he didn't see a total. He saw his life expectancy drop to seconds. In the criminal underworld, information is currency. But timing is everything. A waitress he'd never met had just handed him a lifeline written in ballpoint pen, unaware that by saving the devil, she was inviting herself into hell. This is the story of a bill that cost more than money, and a romance forged in the chamber of a gun. The heat in the city that night was aggressive. It wasn't the kind of heat that made you sweat. It was the dry, crackling kind that made skin feel like parchment and turned the air inside the Obsidian Lounge into a static field. The Obsidian was the kind of establishment that prided itself on lighting so low you couldn't see the grime on the velvet, and prices so high the clientele felt important just by holding the menu. Amaya Rhodes adjusted her apron, the fabric clinging uncomfortably to her waist. She had been working at the Obsidian for 6 months, long enough to know that the heavy oak doors shut out the police sirens, but locked in the sins. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a ghost in a waistcoat, drifting between tables of politicians, laundering bribes, and starlets laundering reputations. She had a gift, one she rarely advertised. She noticed the things people tried hardest to hide. Tonight, the tension was palpable, vibrating through the floorboards like a subway train passing underneath. Her eyes flicked to table 4, Callum Waverley. Even the busboys knew who he was, though they whispered the name like a curse. He sat with his back to the wall, standard protocol for men who made enemies for a living. But the layout of the Obsidian was tricky. The architectural pillars created blind spots, shadows where the light didn't reach. Waverley was handsome in a way that felt dangerous, like a jagged cliff edge. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Amaya's annual rent, his dark hair swept back, his jawline tense. He was drinking neat bourbon, ignoring the steak tartare in front of him. He was waiting for someone. Amaya moved to the service station, pretending to polish wine glasses. She watched the reflection in the mirror behind the bar. A man had entered 10 minutes ago. He hadn't waited to be seated. He had bypassed the hostess stand with the fluid, forgettable grace of a predator and slid into a booth in the mezzanine, the only spot in the restaurant with a direct, elevated line of sight to table 4. He hadn't ordered a drink. He hadn't looked at a menu. He had simply placed a folded newspaper on the table, and beneath it, Amaya saw the dull, metallic glint of a suppressor. She froze, the linen napkin in her hand twisting tight. She knew that look. The dead eyes, the calculated stillness. It wasn't a robbery. It was an erasure. Amaya's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She looked back at Waverley. He was checking his watch, impatient. He pulled his phone out, typing a message. "Where are you? Deal is in 5. Amaya didn't need to see the screen to know he was being stood up. She had overheard the maitre d' talking in hushed, panicked tones on the kitchen line earlier. "The shipment didn't clear. The erratic drives are compromised. Tell the cleaner to scrub the account." At the time, she thought they were talking about computer servers. Now, seeing the man in the mezzanine, she realized scrub the account meant liquidate the asset. Waverley wasn't the boss tonight. He was the loose end. She had 3 choices. 1. Do nothing. Let the bullet fly. Go home, feed her cat, and watch the news tomorrow. 2. Scream. Get everyone killed in the crossfire. 3. Intervene. Amaya wasn't a hero. She was a survivor. But there was something about the casual arrogance of the hitman, the way he treated a human life like a line item on a spreadsheet, that triggered a cold fury in her gut. She grabbed the check folder for table 4. Her hands didn't shake. That was the strange part. The adrenaline made her focused, sharpening the world into high-definition clarity. She pulled her pen from her apron. She couldn't speak to him. The hitman would see the interaction. It had to be routine. It had to be mundane. She scanned the itemized receipt. Bourbon, sparkling water, steak tartare. It wasn't enough. She flipped the receipt over. The paper was thin, cheap thermal stock. She wrote nothing. Writing took too long. Instead, she grabbed the promotional flyer tucked inside every billfold, a glossy insert advertising upcoming jazz nights and happy hour specials. Her pen hovered. Jazz night behind you. No. Special deal gone wrong. Exit now. She circled the words scattered across the text. Gunman. From the phrase Gunman and the Blues Trio. Behind. From Leave Your Worries Behind. You. From We Appreciate You. Deal. From 2 for 1 deal. Gone. From Before the Night is Gone. Wrong. From Don't Go Wrong with our Pinot. Exit. From Emergency Exit located near. Now. From Book Now. It was a clumsy cipher, a ransom note made of marketing copy. She connected them with jagged, hurried lines. Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now. She took a breath, the air tasting of stale smoke and expensive perfume. She walked toward table 4. Every step felt heavy, as if gravity had doubled. She could feel the gaze of the man in the mezzanine burning into the back of her neck. He was waiting for a clear shot. He was waiting for Waverley to lean back. "Check, sir," Amaya said, her voice dropping an octave, stripping away the customer service sweetness. She placed the black leather folder on the table, sliding it forcefully under his hand, her fingers brushing against his cold, expensive watch. Waverley looked up, annoyed. His eyes were the color of flint, hard, grey, and sparking. "I didn't ask for the check. I'm waiting for a guest." "Your guest isn't coming," Amaya said, her lips barely moving, her eyes locked onto his. "And the kitchen is closed." Something in her tone, the absolute lack of deference, the raw urgency, pierced his arrogance. He frowned, looking from her face to the folder beneath his hand. "Read the specials," she whispered, turning her back on him before he could respond. She walked away, her spine straight, expecting the sound of a gunshot to shatter the spine at any second. She didn't run. Predators chase things that run. She walked to the service station, picked up a pitcher of ice water, and waited for the world to end. Callum Waverley didn't become the head of the Waverley Syndicate by ignoring instincts. The waitress, Amaya, her tag read, had eyes that held too much knowledge for a simple server. They weren't fearful. They were calculating. He opened the folder. He saw the circles, the jagged lines. "Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now." The message hit him with the force of a physical blow. The pieces slammed into place. The delay, the silence from his partners. The meeting spot changed at the last minute to this open, indefensible room. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. He didn't turn around. Turning around was an admission of knowledge. If he turned, the trigger would be pulled. Callum reached for his bourbon glass with his left hand, the movement languid, bored. With his right hand, he slipped the steak knife from the table into his sleeve. The blade was serrated, sharp enough to tear, not cut. He brought the glass to his lips, using the reflection in the amber liquid to scan the room behind him. It was distorted, curved by the glass, but he saw the shape. The mezzanine. The glint. He checked the layout. The front door was 40 feet away, a death march. The kitchen door was 10 feet to his left. Callum stood up. He didn't rush. He buttoned his jacket. He looked like a man who had simply decided to leave. Crack. The sound was suppressed, a harsh sneeze rather than a boom, but the effect was immediate. The whiskey glass on the table exploded, shards of crystal shrapnel flying outward. Callum moved. He didn't duck. He lunged. He threw the heavy table over, the wood splintering as a second bullet embedded itself in the floor where his chest had been a second prior. "Down!" Callum roared, his voice tearing through the hushed ambience of the restaurant. Chaos erupted. Patrons screamed, diving under tables. The polite veneer of civilization vanished, replaced by the primal urge to survive. Amaya was already moving. She had anticipated the shot. She was near the kitchen swing doors. She saw Callum sprinting toward her, low to the ground. The gunman in the mezzanine abandoned stealth. He stood up, firing rapidly. Thwip, thwip, thwip. Bullets chewed up the upholstery, shattered the vintage mirrors, decimated the liquor bottles behind the bar. The smell of high-proof alcohol and cordite filled the air instantly. Callum reached the kitchen doors, colliding with Amaya. He didn't shove her aside. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. "Kitchen," he barked. They burst through the swinging doors into the blinding white light of the back of house. The chefs froze, pans hovering over open flames. "Back exit!" Amaya shouted, taking the lead. She knew this labyrinth. "Move, move!" She pulled Callum past the dish pit, slipping on a slick patch of grease, but recovering instantly. The gunman was already in the dining room. They could hear the heavy boots crunching on broken glass. "He's got a spotter," Callum said, his voice grim. "Back alley is covered." Amaya skidded to a halt near the walk-in freezer. "How do you know?" "Because if I were killing me, I'd cover the back. They were trapped. The kitchen was a dead end if the alley was blocked." The gunman pushed through the swinging doors behind them, raising his weapon. Amaya reacted on instinct. She grabbed a canister of flour from the prep table and hurled it into the air between them and the gunman. A white cloud exploded, obscuring vision. The gunman fired blindly through the haze. Bullets pinged off the stainless steel appliances, the sound deafening in the tiled room. "The dumb waiter," Amaya gasped, pointing to the small cargo lift used for bringing wine up from the cellar. "It goes to the basement garage." "It's too small," Callum snapped, eyeing the meter-square box. "For you, maybe. But the chute." She grabbed a heavy cleaver from the magnetic strip on the wall and slammed the handle against the release mechanism of the industrial garbage chute next to it. "The laundry chute. It dumps into the linen cart in the loading bay. You want me to jump down a garbage chute? Better than dying in a cloud of gluten," Amaya yelled, shoving him toward the metal hatch. Callum didn't argue. He dove headfirst into the darkness of the chute. Amaya followed, sliding into the terrifying claustrophobic steel tube just as the flour cloud settled and the gunman cleared his vision. They tumbled down 2 stories, hitting a pile of soiled tablecloths and napkins with a bone-jarring thud. The smell of stale wine and bleach was overwhelming. Callum rolled out of the cart, gun drawn, a sleek pistol he had pulled from a concealed holster at the small of his back. He scanned the loading bay. Empty. "Car," he demanded, pulling Amaya out of the linen pile. She was covered in white flour, looking like a vengeful ghost. "I took the bus," she snapped, wiping dust from her eyes. Unbelievable. Callum scanned the garage, a delivery van, a few sedans, and in the corner, a vintage, jagged red Pontiac Firebird. "Please tell me that's the chef's." "The owner's," Amaya said. "He keeps the keys in the—" Callum was already at the driver's side window. He didn't look for keys. He slammed his elbow through the glass, unlocked the door, and slid inside. He ripped the panel under the steering column loose. "Or get in!" Amaya hesitated for a fraction of a second. This was kidnapping. This was aiding and abetting. This was insanity. A door slammed open 3 floors above them. Footsteps echoed in the stairwell. She jumped into the passenger seat. The engine roared to life, a guttural, mechanical scream that echoed off the concrete walls. Callum slammed the car into gear, the tires squealing, burning rubber as they shot toward the exit ramp. The metal gate was closing. The spotter outside had triggered the lockdown. "Hold on," Callum said, his face a mask of terrifying focus. "You're not going to—" He floored it. The Firebird hit the descending gate at 60 miles per hour. Metal screamed, sparks showered the windshield like fireworks, and the heavy gate buckled, flying off its tracks. They burst out into the cool, dry night air, debris trailing behind them. Callum drifted the car around a corner, narrowly missing a taxi, and sped into the labyrinth of the city streets. Amaya gripped the dashboard, her knuckles white. She looked at the man beside her. He was bleeding from a cut on his cheek, covered in flour and glass dust, driving like a demon. "You tipped poorly," she muttered, the adrenaline making her delirious. Callum glanced at her, a corner of his mouth twitching upward. "I'll make it up to you." The drive was a blur of neon lights and dark alleyways. Callum drove with a precise paranoia, taking sudden turns, doubling back, and killing the headlights periodically to check for tails. The silence in the car was heavy, filled only with the throaty rumble of the V8 engine and the rush of wind through the broken window. They didn't stop until they reached the industrial sector, the skeletal remains of the city's manufacturing past. Here, the buildings were jagged silhouettes against the moonless sky. Callum pulled the battered Firebird into the loading bay of a defunct textile factory. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was ringing in Amaya's ears. "Out," he said, his voice flat. Amaya stepped out, her legs trembling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, shaky exhaustion. She looked at her uniform. Torn, stained, ruined. Callum walked around the car. He didn't look exhausted. He looked energized, the brush with death acting like a stimulant. He holstered his weapon, but didn't button his jacket. "Who are you?" he asked. It wasn't a polite question. It was an interrogation. "I'm the waitress who just saved your life," Amaya retorted, crossing her arms. "Amaya? And you're welcome. Waitresses don't recognize heavy-caliber suppressors on sight, Amaya. Waitresses don't know tactical exit strategies." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne, gunpowder, and sweat. "And they certainly don't write coded messages in 10 seconds flat. I grew up in a neighborhood where reading the room meant the difference between getting home and getting jumped," Amaya lied smoothly. It was a half-truth. "And I watch a lot of movies." Callum studied her face in the dim light of the factory. He was looking for a crack in the facade. "You recognized the shooter?" "I saw a man with a gun. I didn't ask for his ID. That man was Vargas. He's not a local hitter. He's imported. Expensive. Which means someone very close to me paid a premium to have me removed." Callum turned away, pacing the concrete floor. He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging a shard of glass. "Deal gone wrong," Amaya said softly. "That's what I wrote." Callum stopped. "How did you know?" "Lip reading," she admitted. "Earlier. The maître d'. He was on the phone. He mentioned erratic drives and scrubbing the account. I thought it was EAT support until I saw Vargas." Callum let out a short, dark laugh. "The maître de Julien. I paid for his daughter's braces, and he sold me out for— what? A clean ledger." He winced, his hand going to his side. Amaya noticed the dark stain spreading on his white dress shirt, just above the hip. "You're hit." Callum looked down, seemingly surprised by his own blood. "Graze, debris, or a ricochet?" "Sit down," Amaya commanded. She moved toward him, her nurse instinct kicking in. Another remnant of a past she wasn't sharing. "I'm fine. You're bleeding on a stolen car in an abandoned warehouse. You're far from fine. Sit." Surprisingly, the Mafia Boss obeyed. He sat on the hood of the Firebird. Amaya inspected the wound. It was a nasty gash, jagged and bleeding sluggishly, but not deep. "I need a first aid kit, or vodka and a sewing kit," she said. "Glove box," Callum gestured. "Not the car, The bag I grabbed from under the seat. Amaya retrieved a small black duffel bag he had apparently stashed or pulled during the chaos. Inside, it wasn't money. It was survival gear. Burner phones, cash, passports, and a trauma kit. You were planning to run, she realized. I was planning to retire, Callum corrected. Tonight was supposed to be the handover. The deal. I hand over the keys to the kingdom. They give me my freedom. Apparently, retirement packages are cheaper if the recipient is dead. He hissed in pain as Amaya applied antiseptic. Her hands were gentle but firm. For a moment, the barrier between them, predator and prey, criminal and civilian, thinned. She was touching his skin, cleaning his blood. He was watching her hands, fascinated by their steadiness. "Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice lower, lacking the edge from before. "You could have walked away. You should have." Amaya paused, holding a piece of gauze. She looked up at him. The heat of the warehouse was stifling, dust motes dancing in the sliver of moonlight from a high window. "I don't like bullies," she said simply, "and I really hate it when people waste food." Callum stared at her. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming him from a terrifying figure into something devastatingly charismatic. "Remind me to tip you better next time," he said. "There won't be a next time," Amaya said, taping the bandage down. "I'm going home." "You can't go home, Amaya." The statement hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "Excuse me?" "Vargas saw you. He saw you hand me the note. He saw us leave together. In his eyes, and in the eyes of the people who hired him, you aren't a witness. You're an accomplice." Callum hopped off the hood of the car, buttoning his shirt over the bandage. "You go back to your apartment. You're dead within the hour." Amaya felt the blood drain from her face. "So I'm what? A hostage?" "No," Callum said, walking to the factory doors and peering out into the darkness. "You're my partner. Until I kill Vargas and whoever signed his check, you're stuck with me." He turned back to her, extending a hand. "Welcome to the underworld, Amaya. Try not to get us both killed." Amaya looked at his hand, then at the dark, dusty expanse of the warehouse. The safety of her old life, the boring shifts, the cat, the lonely nights, was gone, incinerated in a flash of gunfire. She took his hand. It was warm and rough. "If we survive this," she said, "I'm charging you for overtime." The safe house wasn't a bunker or a basement. It was a penthouse overlooking the city's financial district, a glass box suspended in the sky, detached from the grit of the streets below. Callum keyed a complex code into the private elevator, and the doors slid open to reveal a sprawling, minimalist apartment. It was stark, white, and cold, a stark contrast to the chaotic warmth of the obsidian lounge. "Don't touch the windows," Callum warned, tossing his ruined jacket onto a leather couch that looked like it had never been sat on. "They're bulletproof, but the sensors are sensitive. You lean on them, and a tactical team shows up in 4 minutes." Amaya stood in the center of the room, feeling absurd in her flour-dusted uniform. She looked at her reflection in the darkened glass. She looked like a refugee from a bakery explosion. "Is this where you live?" she asked, her voice echoing in the empty space. "This is where I exist when I'm dead," Callum corrected. He walked to a sleek wall panel, pressed a hidden catch, and a section of the wall rotated to reveal a weapons cache that rivaled a small armory. Officially, Callum Waverley died in a restaurant shootout an hour ago. Until we know who ordered the hit, we stay ghosts. He began stripping off his shirt, revealing the bandage Amaya had applied in the warehouse, now stained red. His torso was a map of violence, scars that told stories of knives, bullets, and bad decisions. Amaya looked away, feeling a sudden, intense intrusion of intimacy. "I need a shower, and clothes that don't smell like a deep fryer. Master bedroom on the left. Walk-in closet has Supplies. Pick something. Amaya didn't ask why a bachelor hitman had women's clothes in his closet. She didn't want to know. She retreated to the bathroom, locking the door with a trembling hand. Under the scalding water, the adrenaline finally crashed. She slid down the marble wall, burying her face in her knees. What was she doing? She was a waitress. She paid her taxes. She fed her stray cat, Barnaby. She didn't disarm security systems or analyze exit strategies. But that wasn't entirely true, was it? She scrubbed her skin until it was raw, washing away the blood that wasn't hers. When she emerged, wrapped in a plush robe, she found the closet. It wasn't filled with women's clothes, as she had feared. It was stocked with generic, tactical gear, unisex flight suits, hoodies, cargo pants. Utility, not vanity. She chose a black hoodie and fitted jeans. She looked less like a waitress and more like an accomplice. When she returned to the living room, Callum was sitting at a massive glass desk, surrounded by monitors. He was typing furiously with one hand, holding a phone to his ear with the other. "The accounts are frozen," he said into the phone, his voice ice cold. "All of them. Which means they have access to the Cayman servers. Who has the keys, Marcus?" Pause. "Then find him. If Julian talks, we lose the leverage." He hung up and slammed the phone onto the desk. He looked up at Amaya. His eyes were tired, but the intensity was undimmed. "You clean up well," he noted, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second too long. "I found your wardrobe lack of disturbing," she quipped, deflection being her primary defense mechanism. "So who is Marcus?" "My second in command. The only person besides you who isn't trying to kill me, allegedly." "And Julian?" "The maitre d', the man who signaled the hit." Callum stood up, wincing slightly. "We have to get to him before Vargas does. Julian knows who hired the shooter. He knows the deal was a setup." "You're in no condition to go anywhere," Amaya pointed out, gesturing to his side. "Pain is information, Amaya. It tells you you're still alive." He grabbed a fresh jacket from a chair. "Stay here. Watch the monitors. If the perimeter alarm goes red, press the button under the desk and hide in the panic room." "No." Callum froze. "No. I'm not staying here to watch your screens like a glorified secretary. You said I'm a partner. Partners don't get left behind." She walked over to the weapons wall, her eyes scanning the racks. "Besides, you're injured. You need a spotter." "You don't know how to shoot." Amaya reached out and picked up a Sig Sauer P226. She checked the magazine, racked the slide, and engaged the safety with a fluidity that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. "I learned to shoot in Texas," she said, her voice devoid of humor. "My father insisted. He said the world was full of wolves." Callum stared at her, the gun looking like an extension of her hand. The mystery of the waitress was deepening, unspooling like a complex knot. He realized, with a jolt of dark exhilaration, that he wasn't just attracted to her beauty. He was attracted to her danger. "Fine," Callum said, a shark-like grin surfacing. "Let's go hunting." Julian's house was in the suburbs, a sprawling, manicured illusion of peace. The lawn was cut with geometric precision. The sprinklers hissed rhythmically in the dry night air. Callum parked the stolen car, now swapped for a nondescript sedan, 2 blocks away. They approached on foot, sticking to the shadows of the hedges. "He's packing," Amaya whispered, pointing to the second-floor window. A silhouette was moving frantically back and forth. "He's running." "He won't get far," Callum growled. They bypassed the front door. Callum picked the lock on the back patio door with terrifying ease. They moved through the kitchen, the silence of the house heavy and oppressive. They found Julian in the master bedroom. He was shoving stacks of cash into a suitcase. When he saw Callum reflected in the vanity mirror, he didn't scream. He simply collapsed onto the bed, as if his strings had been cut. "I told them it wouldn't work," Julian wept, his hands shaking. "I told them you were too careful." Callum didn't shout. He sat in the armchair opposite the bed, crossing his legs, the gun resting casually on his knee. "Who are they, Julian?" "The board, the syndicate heads. They didn't want you to retire, Callum. You know too much. You hold the encryption keys to half the city's laundering operations. They couldn't let you walk away, so they bought you," Callum said, his voice laced with disappointment rather than anger. "For what? Money? Safety?" "For my daughter," Julian whispered. They said accidents happen to children who play near the road." Amaya felt a chill ripple through her. This wasn't just business. This was monstrosity. "Who is the contact?" Callum asked. "Who gave the order?" "It was—" Julian hesitated, his eyes darting to the window. "It was the man in the grey suit, the one they call the architect. He meets at the old rail yard. Tonight. Midnight. To pay Vargas." "Vargas is alive?" Amaya asked. "Vargas is a cockroach," Julian said bitterly. "He survives everything." Suddenly, a red laser dot danced across Julian's forehead. "Get down!" Amaya screamed, tackling Callum off the chair. Thwip! The window shattered. Julian's head snapped back, a single clean hole appearing in the center of his forehead. He fell back onto the suitcase filled with blood money. "Sniper!" Callum yelled, rolling and kicking the bedroom lights out. Darkness swallowed the room. Another bullet tore through the wall where Amaya had been standing a second before. "He's in the tree line across the street," Callum hissed. "We're pinned." Amaya crawled across the floor, glass biting into her palms. "The sprinklers," she whispered. "What?" "The control panel is in the hallway. I saw it. If I trigger the emergency cycle, it'll create a wall of water and mist outside. It might disrupt the thermal scope, or at least give us visual cover." "Do it!" Callum ordered. "I'll draw his fire." "You'll get killed." "I'm harder to kill than I look. Go." Callum fired 3 shots blindly toward the window, the muzzle flashes illuminating the room in strobe light bursts. The sniper returned fire, shredding the drywall. Amaya scrambled into the hallway, found the panel, and smashed the plastic cover. She cranked the dial to max and hit override. Outside, 100 sprinkler heads erupted simultaneously. The hissing sound was deafening, a sudden, artificial monsoon rising from the grass. "Move!" Callum grabbed her hand, and they sprinted down the stairs. They burst out the back door. The air was thick with mist, blurring the world. A shot rang out, hitting the pavement, sparks flying at their heels, but the sniper couldn't get a lock through the wall of water. They scrambled over the back fence, tearing their clothes on the wood, and sprinted through the neighbor's yard, putting houses between them and the killer. They reached the car, breathless, lungs burning. Callum shoved the key into the ignition. "The rail yard," he said, peeling away from the curb. "Midnight." "You're going?" Amaya stared at him. "It's a trap. It's obviously a trap." "I know," Callum said, his eyes hard as flint. "But it's the only place where the architect will be, and I have a receipt to return." Chapter 6. Shadows in the neon. They had an hour to kill before midnight. They couldn't go back to the penthouse. It might be compromised if Julian talked before he died. They needed to disappear in plain sight. Callum drove to the night market, a sprawling labyrinth of stalls, food trucks, and neon lights in the Asian district. It was crowded, noisy, and chaotic, the perfect camouflage. They walked through the throngs of people, the scent of grilled satay and exhaust fumes filling the air. Amaya pulled her hood up. Callum walked with his head down, blending into the flow of humanity. They found a secluded booth in the back of a dim noodle shop. The plastic tablecloth was sticky, the light flickering fluorescent. Callum ordered 2 bowls of beef noodle soup. He hadn't eaten since the steak tartare he never touched. "You saved me again," Callum said quietly, breaking the silence. He was watching her, dissecting her. "The sprinklers. That was smart. I used to work landscaping one summer," Amaya murmured, staring into her soup. "You pick things up." "Landscaping, medical training," tactical awareness. You're a woman of many talents, Amaya Rhodes. And you're a man of many enemies. Callum reached across the table. He took her hand. His fingers were rough, calloused from gun grips and violence, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "I'm sorry," he said. Amaya looked up, startled. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. You were right. You should have just let the bullet fly." "No," Amaya said firmly. She didn't pull her hand away. "I couldn't watch someone die, not even you." "Why not even me?" "Because," Amaya said, her voice dropping, "I've seen what happens when the bad guys win. My father, he wasn't just paranoid, he was a cop, a good one. And the wolves he talked about? They were men like you, men in suits who decided who lived and who died." Callum went still. "And they killed him. They made him disappear," she corrected. "Erased him. Like your friend Vargas tries to do. That's why I recognized the look. I've been waiting for that look my whole life." Callum tightened his grip on her hand. The connection between them shifted. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was recognition. Two people scarred by the same fire, standing on opposite sides of the flame. "I'm not a good man, Amaya," Callum said, his voice low and rough, vibrating with a dangerous intensity. "I've done things that would make you sick. But I have a code, and I don't kill honest men." "You just kill the dishonest ones?" "I take out the trash," he said. "But tonight I'm asking you to help me take out the landfill." He leaned in closer. The noise of the market faded. The heat between them spiked, sharp and sudden. It would have been the moment for a kiss in a normal story, but this wasn't a normal story. Callum pulled back, checking his watch. "It's time," he said. 11:45. He dropped a $100 bill on the table. Old habits died hard. "Listen to me," Callum said as they stood up. "The rail yard is open ground. Old shipping containers. Rusted tracks. If this goes south, and it will, you don't wait for me. You take the car, and you drive to the border. There's a burner phone in the glove box, with a number saved as Cleaner. Call it. Give them the code Valkyrie. They'll give you a new name. A new life." "I'm not leaving you," Amaya said. "Amaya, I'm not leaving," she repeated, her eyes fierce. "You said we're partners, and I want to see the architect fall." Callum looked at her, a mixture of fear and awe in his eyes. He realized then that she was more dangerous than he was. He had nothing to lose but his life. She had nothing to lose but her soul. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay, then let's go finish the deal." They walked out of the neon glow and into the darkness of the city, moving toward the rusting skeletons of the trains, unaware that the architect wasn't just waiting for them. He was building a tomb. The rail yard was a graveyard for industry. Skeletal cranes loomed over rows of rusted shipping containers and decommissioned train cars, casting long, jagged shadows against the gravel. The air smelled of oil, rust, and the damp breath of the nearby river. It was silent, but it was a deceptive silence, the kind that holds its breath before a scream. Callum killed the headlights a mile out. They approached on foot, moving along the perimeter fence until they found a breach in the chain link. "Stay close," Callum murmured, his voice barely audible over the wind, rattling the metal siding of a nearby warehouse. "Keep your eyes on the high ground. Cranes, catwalks. That's where I'd put a shooter." Amaya nodded, her grip on the Sig Sauer tight. The weight of the gun was becoming familiar, a heavy anchor in the storm of her anxiety. She scanned the dark towers of stacked containers. It felt like walking into the mouth of a beast that had already swallowed them whole. They moved through the maze of metal. The meat was scheduled for the central turntable, a wide, open circle of concrete surrounded by tracks. It was the perfect kill box. No cover. No exit. "There," Callum whispered, pulling Amaya behind the rusted wheel of a train car. In the center of the turntable, a single floodlight had been set up, powered by a silent generator. Under the harsh white beam stood a table. On it sat a silver briefcase. Standing next to the table was a man. He wasn't wearing a grey suit. He was wearing tactical gear, stripping away the pretense of a business deal. It was Vargas, the hitman from the restaurant. He was smoking a cigarette, the ember glowing like a demon's eye in the dark. "He's bait," Amaya whispered. "Obviously," Callum replied. "The architect won't show his face until he sees my corpse, or until I hand over the encryption keys." "So what's the plan?" "I go in. I distract them. You flank left. Climb that gantry crane. It gives you a sightline on the shadowed areas where the real threat is hiding. If you see the architect, or anyone who isn't Vargas, you take the shot." Amaya looked at him, horror cold in her stomach. "You want me to use you as a shield?" "I want you to be the predator, not the prey," Callum corrected. He turned to her, his hand cupping her cheek for a brief, electric moment. "You circled exit now on that bill. This is the only exit left." He didn't wait for an answer. He stood up, adjusting his jacket, and walked out into the light. Amaya watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs. She forced herself to move, crouching low and sprinting toward the rusted ladder of the gantry crane. Callum walked into the circle of light with the arrogance of a king reclaiming his throne. Vargas looked up, stomping out his cigarette. "You're late, Waverley," Vargas sneered. His voice was gravel grinding on glass. "Traffic was murder. I had to stop for dessert," Callum said smoothly, stopping 10 feet away. "Where is he? I don't negotiate with the help." "The architect is watching," Vargas said, gesturing vaguely to the darkness. "He wants the drive. Then you get the boat. A nice, fast exit out of the country. Just like you wanted. We both know there's no boat, Vargas. Just a shallow grave by the tracks." Amaya reached the top of the crane. The wind was stronger up here, whipping her hair across her face. She lay flat on the metal grating, looking down. The view was terrifyingly clear. She saw Callum and Vargas in the light. But she saw something else, too. In the shadows of a container stack to the north, 3 men were moving. They were setting up a crossfire, and behind them, on a raised platform, stood a figure in a grey suit. He was watching through binoculars. The architect. He lowered the binoculars, and even from this distance, Amaya felt a shock of recognition that nearly made her drop the gun. It wasn't the face. It was the posture. The way he held his left arm slightly stiff, as if it were injured or prosthetic. She flashed back to a memory from 10 years ago. Her father's funeral. A man standing at the back, watching not with sadness, but with satisfaction. A man with a stiff left arm. Officer Miller, her father's partner. The uncle who had brought casserole to the wake. The betrayal wasn't just Callum's. It was hers. "Callum!" she screamed into the wind, abandoning stealth. "It's a crossfire! North side!" The shout shattered the standoff. Vargas drew his weapon instantly. Callum, anticipating the move, dove behind the metal table just as bullets sparked off the concrete where he had been standing. The 3 men in the shadows opened fire. The air filled with the deafening roar of automatic weapons. Amaya didn't think. She aimed at the muzzle flashes in the dark. She squeezed the trigger. Bang! The recoil jarred her shoulder, but one of the shadows crumpled. She was in the fight. The rail yard became a chaotic symphony of gunfire and ricochets. Callum was pinned behind the heavy steel table, suppressing fire chipping away at his cover. He returned fire with deadly precision, taking out one of the flankers. But Vargas was advancing, moving from cover to cover with relentless efficiency. Amaya racked the slide of her pistol. She had the high ground, but she was exposed. Bullets pinged off the crane's metal frame, sending rust flakes into her eyes. She shifted her aim. Not at the soldiers, at the architect. He was moving, retreating toward a waiting black SUV, hidden behind the containers. He was leaving. "No, you don't," Amaya hissed. She fired. The shot went wide, sparking off the container next to him. The architect looked up, his face illuminated briefly by a stray beam of light. He saw her. He stopped. He didn't run. He pulled a radio from his pocket. Suddenly the crane shuddered. Amaya looked down. One of the surviving mercenaries was climbing the ladder. She was about to be flanked. "Amaya, jump!" Callum's voice roared from the ground. He had broken cover. He was sprinting toward the crane, firing 2 guns simultaneously, forcing Vargas back. Amaya looked at the gap between the crane and the top of a stacked container. It was 6 feet. A death drop if she missed. She holstered her gun and ran. She leaped into the void, arms flailing. She slammed onto the corrugated metal roof of the container, the impact jarring the breath from her lungs. She rolled, absorbing the momentum, and scrambled to the edge. Callum was below, pinned down by Vargas, who had taken a position behind a train wheel. Amaya saw a heavy chain securing the container doors above Vargas. The locking mechanism was rusted, held by a simple pin. She crawled to the edge, aimed her gun at the pin, and fired. Ping! Miss! Ping! Hit! The pin shattered. The heavy steel doors of the container swung open with a groan of tortured metal. The contents, hundreds of heavy steel pipes, cascaded out like a waterfall of iron. Vargas looked up too late. The avalanche of steel buried him instantly. The sound was like a building collapsing. Silence returned to the yard, heavy and dust-choked. Callum stood up, breathing hard. He looked up at Amaya. "Nice timing." "I circled, exit now," she called down, her voice trembling. "I meant it." She climbed down the side of the container. They met in the wreckage. There was no time for relief. The SUV engine roared to life. "The architect!" Callum said, reloading his weapon. "It's Miller," Amaya said, wiping grit from her face. "My father's partner. He's the architect." Callum froze. "Miller? The police commissioner?" "He wasn't commissioner back then. He earned that title by burying my dad and your secrets." The SUV peeled out from behind the stack, heading for the exit. Callum raised his gun, but the vehicle was armored. Bullets would just scratch the paint. "He's getting away," Callum cursed. "No," Amaya said, her eyes scanning the tracks. "He's not." She pointed to the track switch lever near them. The tracks the SUV was driving along, crossing the rails to get to the road, were intersection tracks. A freight train, dark and silent, had been rumbling slowly through the yard on the main line, ignoring the gunfire as just another city noise. "Help me!" Amaya grabbed the heavy iron lever. Callum understood instantly. He holstered his gun and grabbed the lever with her. Together, they heaved. The rusted mechanism groaned, fought them, and then clunked into place. The tracks shifted. The slow-moving freight train didn't stop. It diverted onto the spur line, the line that crossed directly in front of the escaping SUV. The architect saw the train too late. He slammed on the brakes. The SUV skidded on the gravel, stopping inches from the tracks. But he was cut off. The train was long, a wall of moving steel blocking his exit. Callum and Amaya walked toward the SUV. The architect was trapped between the train and the 2 wolves he had tried to put down. The driver's door opened. An older man stepped out. He wore a grey suit, immaculate despite the chaos. His left arm hung stiffly. "Amaya," Miller said, his voice fatherly, disappointing. "You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have ordered steak tartare," Amaya said coldly. "It gave me time to read the menu." Miller smiled, a sad, condescending smile. He reached into his jacket. Callum raised his gun. "Careful, Waverley," Miller said. "I'm not reaching for a weapon. I'm reaching for this." He pulled out a remote detonator. "The car is rigged," Miller said calmly. "And so is the perimeter. You kill me, my heart rate monitor stops, and this entire yard turns into a crater. We all die." Callum hesitated. He knew men like Miller. They didn't bluff. So here is the new deal, Miller said, stepping away from the car. I walk away. I keep the encryption keys. I keep the city. And in exchange, I let you live. You and the girl. He looked at Amaya. You can disappear, honey. Just like you wanted. Go start a bakery. Forget you ever saw me. Callum looked at Miller, then at Amaya. The calculation was happening behind his eyes. If he let Miller go, the syndicate won. The corruption continued, but Amaya lived. If he shot Miller, they likely died. But the monster died with them. Take the deal, Callum, Miller urged. Be smart. You're a businessman. Callum lowered his gun slightly. I am a businessman. Amaya felt her heart stop. He was going to do it. He was going to sell out justice for survival. But, Callum continued, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, I recently renegotiated my contract. He looked at Amaya. Do you trust me? Amaya looked at the detonator, then at Callum's flint-grey eyes. There was no fear in them anymore, only a promise. Yes, she whispered. Duck, Callum said. He didn't shoot Miller. He shot the remote detonator in Miller's hand. The bullet shattered the plastic casing. The device sparked and exploded in Miller's grip, blowing his hand apart. Miller screamed, dropping to his knees, clutching his mangled arm. It wasn't a dead man's switch, Callum said, walking forward. It was a standard RF trigger. You lied, Miller. You're a cop. You don't want to die. Callum stood over the architect. The freight train was still rumbling past, a rhythmic clack, clack, clack that sounded like a clock ticking down. My father, Amaya said, stepping up beside Callum. Where is he? Miller looked up, sweat and blood pouring down his face. He's beneath the foundation of the precinct, the new wing. Amaya closed her eyes. The truth was a physical blow, but it was also a release. He wasn't missing. He was found. Finish it, Miller hissed at Callum. Kill me. The syndicate will just send another. Callum raised his gun. Let them come. I'm not hiding anymore. No, Amaya said. She put her hand on Callum's gun, lowering it. Callum looked at her, surprised. He deserves it. He does, Amaya agreed. But if you kill him, you're just a hitman. If we leave him, he's a confession. She pointed to the flashing lights in the distance. The real police were coming. The gunfire had finally drawn attention. We leave him for the cops, Amaya said. We leave the encryption drive with him. We leak the files to the press. We don't just kill him, Callum. We destroy his legacy. We burn his reputation to the ground. Callum looked at the sirens, then at Amaya. He saw the fire in her eyes. It was brighter than any muzzle flash. She wasn't asking for revenge. She was asking for justice. He smiled, a real smile. He crouched down, took the silver encryption drive from his pocket, and shoved it into Miller's bloody pocket. Courtesy of Table 4, Callum whispered. He stood up and grabbed Amaya's hand. We have to go. The exit is closing. They turned and ran, not away from the danger, but toward the gap between the train cars. They jumped onto the moving freight train, clinging to the ladder as it carried them out of the yard, into the darkness, leaving the architect broken in the dirt for the wolves he had tried to control. The wind rushed past them as the train gathered speed, cutting through the night. They sat on the roof of a boxcar, watching the city lights fade into the distance. Amaya leaned her head on Callum's shoulder. She was exhausted, bruised, and her life was effectively over. She was a fugitive. So, she said, her voice hoarse, where are we going? Callum wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close against the cold. I have a safe house in the Mediterranean. It has terrible coffee, but the view is decent. I can fix the coffee, Amaya said, closing her eyes. I'm counting on it. Callum looked at the woman who had saved his life with a ballpoint pen. He realized he had left his empire behind, his money, his power, and he had never felt richer. Amaya? Yeah. Next time we go out for dinner, we're ordering pizza. Amaya laughed, a sound that carried away into the night, signaling not an end, but a beginning. And that, my friends, is how a simple dinner bill brought down an empire. If you enjoyed this ride through the underworld, make sure to smash that like button. It helps the algorithm more than a cryptic note on a receipt. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Would you have circled the words? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, check your receipts and watch your back.